want to take a moment to draw your attention to two specific numbers. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, it's estimated back in 2021, an estimated 47 million Americans left their job because of concerns over the COVID-19 pandemic, contributing to what's known as the Great Resignation, causing many people to reinvent themselves and start anew. The second number I'd like for you to consider is the following. According to 247 Sports, the top 33 of the top 98 players of the top 150 players have already committed to a school for the upcoming calendar year in college basketball. You may be asking yourself, what on earth do these numbers have in common? Well, in sum total, I'm glad you asked. They're related to my friend Jared Zeidman, who's been coaching college basketball for the better part of 15 years at the scholarship and non-scholarship level. Unfortunately, he had to step away from college coaching due to complications from COVID-19. However, that hasn't deterred him from staying involved in the college game as a consultant, color commentator, and an advisor for young college athletes and their families who want to nail the college recruiting process and find the perfect fit. In his time away from coaching, he's been able to author a book, which will be forthcoming, entitled Nail the Recruiting Process. This book will act as a guide to assist college athletes and their parents through the college recruiting landscape. He joined me this week to have a conversation about everything relating to college basketball and the games related to behind the scenes and everything college athletes and their parents need to know to successfully guide themselves through the college recruiting process. We also talked about inclusion in college sports and how we can make it more inclusive in all areas, particularly in broadcasting, for aspiring journalists with a disability who want to break into the field. Zeidman and I had a wide-ranging conversation that any coach, parent, or aspiring college basketball athlete needs to hear. So, without further delay, my conversation with Zeidman starts right now. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Jared, if you're ready, my friend, I'll welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to talk to you about everything relating to college basketball. Great to see you, my friend, and happy Friday to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Jared, I know that you spent nearly 15 years in the realm of college basketball coaching before you had to step away due to complications from COVID, my friend. So tell me about your journey as a college coach in the industry, my friend, and how you got to where you are today, my friend.
Sure. I would say my journey in coaching is a bit different than others. I did not play collegiately. Played in high school. was not very good and was also not very disciplined. So a huge part of my coaching was actually making sure that young people were taking advantage of some opportunities that I did not take advantage of when I was their age. So for me, it started actually when I was in graduate school. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to University of Buffalo for graduate school. I got networked with the men's basketball program there, and they gave me a lot of great opportunities to jump on board and do a little bit of work behind the scenes, and I just fell in love with it. So after working a regular job for 4 years and balancing some volunteer coaching in the background, I knew I wanted to get back into it full time. I had built a relationship with Mary Ellen Burt at the Division III level. She's the winningest coach in Union College history, and she took me on. And over 10 years, I went from volunteer assistant to associate head coach. And I spent the last 3 years basically acting as the head coach. She was kind of training me for further jobs. After that, became an assistant coach at Canisius University at the Division I level. Got to work for an amazing coach, Sahar Nusebe. I'll say it to you and your listeners, it is definitely my goal to return to that role. But in the spring of 2022, I got COVID pretty bad, and I'm just kind of still in that recovery window, waiting for my body to get right. I've used this time while I've been out with COVID to try to address some information gaps. I've met a lot of high school kids that are trying to navigate the recruiting process, and I've noticed that there are very similar pain points for a lot of them. So I went out last summer. I did a bunch of research, Kevin, and I found some very specific areas aside from just basketball talent that coaches are looking for. And then I actually fact checked it, and I got information from coaches outside of basketball. And I found out that those qualities were actually very, very similar across the board. So now I'm using this time to educate young people and their families to do a better job, not only presenting themselves on the recruiting trail, but better preparing themselves for college in the first place so that when they arrive, they can flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jared, just before we dive into your experience in helping college and high school athletes with the recruiting side of things, I'm also curious to ask you, how do you think COVID has fundamentally changed the way that we look at college athletics and college basketball as a whole, my friend?
That is a great question that I would actually call a loaded question, Kevin. And I know you're a basketball fan. This has really changed things quickly. So what I would basically describe, and this has happened in a lot of systems, not just with college athletics, but I would describe COVID as an accelerator. There were a lot of things that people had to do to sort of compensate and overcome obstacles during COVID times. And a lot of those things, they started as experiments, and the experiments worked, and now they just are the way things are. We're talking right now on Zoom. Zoom is a great example. No one used Zoom to recruit before the pandemic, and now Zoom is here to stay with recruiting. Every time we're seriously pursuing a young athlete, we are on Zoom with their players and with their families. So using that as an example, I'll now take it to the bigger picture with college athletics. During the COVID era, NIL legislation started changing really rapidly, and transfer rules started changing really rapidly. Everyone got a year back. There were different rules regarding the transfer portal, and now those things are here to stay because of COVID. So what's happening is people are able to transfer, and they're not sitting out with a 1-year penalty anymore. And it's drastically, and I mean drastically, altered the amount of people that have transferred. Last year, literally 20% of the Division I men's and women's basketball populace was in the transfer portal. And that is something that's here to stay post-COVID.
Yeah, and you bring up the transfer portal, Jared, and I'll begin by asking you about how do you think the transfer portal has fundamentally changed college athletics? I'm thinking about, Nick Saban said when he retired it was just time. But I also think that for him and other college coaches that had been in the game, regardless of the sport, before the transfer portal. I don't think a lot of veteran coaches like dealing with the transfer portal. You know,
Yeah.
some adjusted to it. Jared, I live in Windsor, which is a stone's throw away from Michigan State, and I know that Tom Izzo doesn't like using the transfer portal, and he likes to develop his own players, for example. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on how the transfer portal has not only affected players, but coaches' passion for the sport as well.
That's a great question. And I would say there's two very distinctive answers. So, Kevin, I'd like to start on the coaching side. You have made a really interesting point. The transfer portal has added what I can only describe as sort of a free agency component to coaching, where you're not just developing players, but you have to keep them engaged and keep them, feeling like they're having a positive experience, or else they will leave. I don't necessarily have a problem with the players leaving, because in reality, there's a crazy stat, and I think a lot of your listeners wouldn't believe this, but 1/3 of American college students, so non-athletes, 1/3 of American college transfers, or students, excuse me, will transfer at least once in their student experience. So transferring is very normal for regular students. Athletes still actually transfer at a lesser rate. And I think legally, you have to give athletes the same opportunities you give a regular student, or else you can't call them regular students, right? So you have to play that game. Coaches, however, have a bit more of a struggle, because the adjustment as a first-year athlete, sometimes even into your sophomore year, it takes athletes, varying speeds and varying amount of times to adjust to college sports. There are, unless you're in like the ESPN top 100 basketball players, there's a really good shot you're going to show up your first year and you're not going to play. And I think coaches now have to weigh that and be like, well, wait a minute, I don't want this kid to transfer after year one just because they weren't ready. And I think that can be very frustrating for coaches. I also worry. Oh, go ahead, Kevin. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries at all. I also worry about the other perspective, Kevin, which is now that transfers are so much more widely available, because it does take a longer time for a first year in college to adjust, I think coaches are going to start reaching into the transfer portal more often than they actually bring in a first year. And that's the trend that I'm trying to prepare athletes and their parents for. I can tell you right now, Kevin, even at the Division III level, there are teams that are making deep NCAA tournament runs. As we're recording this, it's Sweet 16 weekend for the Division III tournament. And there are a number of teams in the dance riding a major transfer that transferred to their team and not a first-year athlete.
Yeah, so John, let's talk about nailing the recruiting process. I know that's your passion outside of coaching, my friend, and with today's sort of 24/7 news cycle, everyone wants to grab the headlines in terms of the caliber of athlete that they can get to transfer in or commit to their school. So talk to me about nailing the new age of the recruiting process and what that looks like, my friend.
It's a great question. I think it starts with a base level of understanding. So at every level of college sports, Kevin, there's going to be a talent floor. That just is what it is. And a very valuable experience for me that I try to teach recruits now is when I was coaching at the D3 level, it was a ceiling and a floor. So there were some young athletes that were not good enough to play at the D3 level, but there were also athletes that I would watch them play once and be like, that person is going D1. So we should not waste our time. We should not recruit them. So there is a floor and a ceiling with each level. Once you get to D1, there's just a floor. But what I'm trying to explain to recruits now is once you've hit that floor, the coaches are no longer assessing your talent, and they're exclusively assessing other things about you. What is your attitude like? What is your mindset like? What are your communication skills like? how honestly at this day and age, how are your parents? Are your parents over involved in the process, or are they letting you as the prospective athlete take the lead? So what I tell students is to nail this process, you have to do as much of this process as you can on your own. You have to take the initiative. You have to be the one that's initiating communication. And you, as the player, not your parents, are going through that experience and are the point person so that coaches are more confident in your self-efficacy and your ability to do things on your own. That I
Yeah,
think is the biggest separator right now.
yeah, absolutely. And Jared, I'm curious to ask you about the emotions that were in your decision to step away from coaching because, my brother coached high school basketball for 6 years, and uh, there's a saying in coaching, and I don't have to tell you, once a coach, always a coach, right? So tell me about the emotions that went into the decision. I know you were battling COVID, and that was the primary reason you stepped away. But tell me about the emotional toll that the decision had on you and how you worked through it, my friend.
That's a really good question. And I'm very comfortable in sharing that I definitely went through all of the stages of grief. And I would tell you that the biggest stage was denial. And the way that things kind of happened with me, Kevin, was I it didn't all kind of happen in the snap of the fingers. Something would go wrong. We would try to kind of resolve it. And then 3 weeks later, something else would go wrong. And the end result of that was about 6 months later, 6 months after I got COVID, my body really started shutting down. And it required me, per doctor's orders, to do absolutely nothing for 3 months, which was absolutely agonizing. And I think something challenging about going through something like this and not having a formal timetable is people want you to try things and basically see how they go. And the only way that you find out whether or not you're ready is honestly through testing after you tried it. So, where I was, and I think if I'm being honest, the thing I'm most proud of myself was my ability to pivot once I was like, okay, you're not doing better on the testing. Your body's not where it needs to be. There are other things about this life that are important to me. I want to be a dad. I want to be a great husband to my wife, who's the best, and she's currently pregnant. We're expecting our first this summer. I want to thank you very much. um, and I know it sounds very silly, but like I got myself to a place mentally where I want to live a fruitful life more than I want to coach. And is it my dream to get back at it? Absolutely. But I think the big mental shift that I made was once I realized that living a meaningful life was more important than coaching, I was able to kind of lean in a little bit more to that grief and then also find some things that I thought could be meaningful. Had it not been for COVID and this step away from coaching for me, I never would have thought to myself, hey, I've been working with some high school kids that have really interesting questions. And I think I could ask a bunch of my friends in coaching to answer these questions for them. And, that pivot in my life and me leaning into that change was what opened this whole door for the book and the service and the website and the social media campaign. And, you know, I'm not going to pretend it didn't suck in the moment. I mean, there were some really dark nights where you're just kind of sitting back and trying to figure out what happened to you and how to fix it. But once you close a door, life has a way of pointing you to the next door to open. And my support system was incredible. My family was incredible. And I'm so grateful to still have relationships with the coaches and the team at Canisius. They're the best. And it's been an amazing ride.
Well, life is all about reinvention, isn't it?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, and since you brought up the fact that you're about to be a dad, I'm curious, how do you think your coaching sort of psychology will help you be the best parent that you can be?
Well, it's taught me patience, that's for sure. Thankfully, thankfully, I have had the opportunity to work with really, really good mentors and friends. And I've always, above any other skill I've learned in coaching, I've always been able to lean on amazing, open, and honest relationships. So the thing I'm most excited about in raising a young person is honestly just teaching them to be their authentic selves, being patient with them, and letting them learn by doing. And the other big thing about coaching, Kevin, is when you're a coach, you can't always overcome the obstacles for your players. You can encourage them, you can show them the way, but I can't go out on the court and do it for them. I'm very excited to parent like that. I do not want to be the obstacle for my kid. I want to be the encouraging, positive voice, but it's going to be okay if they fall. I'm not going to be that parent that freaks out. I want to teach resilience, and I'm really excited about it. I seriously cannot wait.
We learn from experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Jared, I'm also curious to ask you about, as our society evolves, people look to athletes in position of prominence for direction on how they should carry themselves in life. So I'm also curious to ask you about the psychology of both coaches and athletes as it relates to their social responsibility to lead by example, but also taking into account their mental health and stability to perform. I'm wondering how you think athletes and coaches can manage that in today's society.
Kevin, I'm so happy that you tacked on the last part of that question, because in my answer, I'm actually going to say that I think those two things are joined. There is a huge mental health component, Kevin, in what we do day to day. I think the biggest mistake that young athletes make is that they pour in too much of their identity as a person into their sport. And I want to use myself as an example. I spent an unnecessary amount of time in hindsight trying to unpack who I was from what I did as a coach when I got sick, because I poured so much into that bucket. And it took me taking a step back and being like, wait a minute. I got tons of energy. I got a positive attitude. I have an amazing wife. I have all these friends. There's all these qualities that make me me. And what I've seen, particularly since the start of the pandemic, and I'm so proud of these athletes, and I'm going to shout them out specifically. I think the athletes that have led the way on this have been the athletes that make up the WNBA. I think they have been phenomenal. And they are the athletes that I think first and most boldly embraced their identities, not only for their mental health, but in turn, by remembering that they're more than just basketball players and that they have this platform. They ushered in this era of, well, wait a minute, I have a responsibility to bring in attention to causes, whether that's something, as bold as the Black Lives Matter movement or specific causes, or something, much more specific and direct in Maya Moore walking away from the game to, help get someone wrongfully accused and being in prison out of prison. Those are important causes that when you take a step back and you unlock your own mental journey and remember, hey, I have this great skill as an athlete. That's a part of who I am, but it's not the whole thing. That's when you get to elevate your platform and use it for more good. And I'm so proud because of that to be a part of the women's basketball game as it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, Jared, I know in this stage of life, you're a basketball consultant and commentator who helps college athletes and parents and coaches develop programs throughout the recruiting process. So tell me about your current work and why it's your current passion, my friend.
I'll go with the passion part first. I see a lot of people that I think have more potential at college as college athletes than they realize. So the number one thing I want to do is I'm deeply passionate about getting more people to try to play college sports because of the life rewards that come with being on a college team. The soft skills, communication, time management, accountability, responsibility, but then also the true leadership skills, the hard leadership skills that are developed by being on a team. I want more people to have that experience. So that's the why for the passion. But the what I'm doing is I'm basically taking high school athletes and parents, and in some instances, full AAU and club teams, and I'm basically pulling the curtain back and showing them what college athletes look like right now. What does a workout look like? What does being coached look like? What does a full practice look like? And then what are the cultural expectations of players behind the scenes? And I want people to see that so that they're ready when that time arrives for them. And by teaching them how to execute some of those skills now, they can shine in the recruiting process and look more like a valued addition to a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jared, I'm curious to ask you about leadership and how you think the evolution of today's college athlete has really taken on the mantle of leadership and really stepped into their own space of difference. You know, I always say that life is about making a constant, impactful difference. You know, there's a line at the end of my bio that says, the smiles that I get in life don't come from personal achievement. It comes from the smiles I'm allowed to put on other people's faces through the work that I do. So I'm
Right.
curious to ask you about leadership and how you think it equates to today's athletes and athletics in general.
I love this question so much, and it's the thing I'm most passionate about talking about. I think the first part of leadership is addressing a misunderstanding, which is that most 18-year-olds enter college and they wrongfully assume that the best leaders are simply the people that are the loudest. Whoever talks the most and contributes the most and has the best ideas are the best leaders. And what you start to learn when you're in college and why college sports is so valuable is using your voice and communicating is one of probably like 50 small components of what actually makes a great leader. If you're not listening and collaborating just as much as you're talking, then you're not an effective leader. Similarly, you have to know when to enable others, when to encourage, when to think outside the box and bring in some new ideas, when the right time is to actually, I'm not going to talk. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be the hearing voice in the room, and I'm going to kind of push myself here. All of those things are small skills that you can refine as a college athlete. And when you address your limitations and you try to grow, not only are you growing leadership skills on one side of the equation, which is really important, but you're also building up resilience and courage on the other side of the equation, which ends up being the most important things. And when you see these seniors that are outstanding, and obviously the big example right now is Caitlin Clark, who just set the scoring record, part of Caitlin Clark's growth has been her resilience and her continued work and grit and tenacity. Those are the things that you don't always see on Instagram stories and in advertisements, but really, really matter and are the huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and Jared, I'm gonna share just a personal story that connects to our conversation. So, Jared, when I went to college, I originally went to college to become a sports reporter, and I should back up by telling you when I was born, Jared, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy.
Okay.
Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. My parents found out that, first of all, I was born 3 months premature, and my parents found out when I was born that I wasn't supposed to live past 3.5, and I'm now 35. And I found out,
Wow.
yeah, and I found out at the age of 9, my friend, that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life without assistance because of the severity of the cerebral palsy I was born with. But going back to my college story, so I originally went to school to become a sports reporter, and I graduated college in 2010. And when I went on job interviews to become a field reporter for sports and news, I was rejected from the first 10 job applications I put in because of my disability. They told me when I went into a news director's office, and I had a lot of energy and passion and enthusiasm for the business and reporting, but because of my disability, they viewed that as a liability, and I didn't think they had enough assets to support my growth as a reporter. So out of college, Darren, I spent 4 years as a volunteer sports and a general assignment reporter. I didn't ask for a paycheck. All I wanted was the experience. So I actually fell into becoming a motivational speaker by accident because no one would hire me out of college. But I'm curious to ask you about how do you think we can eliminate barriers towards inclusion in athletics and broadcasting as well, because I know you're a broadcaster as well.
Sure. I'm so happy. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story, because there are so many components to your story and other stories that I've heard that really show me how much work still needs to be done. Because especially, and I come from a specific area, and this is where some of my frustration is. Higher education, especially in America, does a tremendous job talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, and they don't always walk the walk. And what I would encourage other people to do is I would encourage people, if you're nervous about hiring somebody full-time, then take a chance and hire somebody freelance or hire somebody part-time and give them an opportunity to prove what they can do. Kevin, I'm willing to tell this to you because, I can tell already that you and I are going to be cool long after this podcast airs, just because of your personality. I have been doing the podcast circuit for a couple weeks now. Some of the podcasts have been great. Some of the podcasts, you could tell the hosts aren't prepared. You did such an exceptional job preparing. And you also have, just in the flow of this conversation, you've changed up some of the questions just based on, what we've been talking about. That matters. Your attention to detail matters. And when I hear that you haven't been getting some of those opportunities, it fires me up, because it is, to me, an illustration of people in positions of power not wanting to think outside the norm. Something that I'll tell you right now is that if somebody wants to hire me to coach or to consult, and if it's a bigger project, one of the things I say back is, I can only give you 2 to 3 hours a week. That's all my body can take right now if you want to hire me for a big project. And that's going to require somebody to get creative and think outside the box about how they want to use somebody. You have to have the courage as a leader. You have to think outside the box, embrace difference, and bring in people that don't look like you, that don't have the same background as you, that haven't gone through the same journey as you. To me, and I know this is a cliche phrase, but to me, that's putting your money where your mouth is. If I see a room full of 50 people that look like me and behave like me, and one of the things that they say as they talk is that equity and inclusion is important to them, I will leave that room. I don't have time for inauthentic people. And I would encourage anyone listening to this to think outside the box when it comes to hiring. And if you don't have the courage, I hate that this is a reality, but if you don't have the courage to hire somebody full-time because you're not ready to think that far outside the box, start with the freelance gig. Start with a part-time gig. Integrate someone with difference onto your team and watch what it does for the rest of your team.
Yeah, it helps with morale and it helps with productivity at work, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, it's part of, if I'm being honest with you, part of coaching a college sport in general is assessing a component of privilege. You're on the recruiting trail looking for literally the most talented, able-bodied people you can. So I always think it's important for athletes to have the perspective of privilege as they go through this environment, which is, again, why I think hiring outside of difference could be so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Jared, let's talk about your book and the research that you did to put it together, my friend. Tell me about nailing the recruiting process and what you hope people and coaches and parents and athletes get out of it, my friend.
So, specifically talking about the data, I think anytime someone hears about research, especially in this current American culture, they immediately think about political research, where 50% of people are on one side and 50% of people are on the other side, no matter what the issue is. And the thing that got me so excited about the research that I did was that is not how the college coaching community feels. In fact, there was only one question that I asked where the coaches were really polarized. And that question was, how do you handle over-involved parents in the recruiting process? But for everything else, the coaches responded in a cluster. And I was so fascinated by it that I actually deliberately made the decision to include the data in the back of the book as an appendix. There are some universal truths now in the recruiting process, and I'm happy to share those universal truths with athletes. So that is the foundation the book is built on. So my goal was, let's just assume you are reading this book and you have not thought at all about going through the recruiting process. You could take the data that I obtained interviewing and surveying coaches and then talking to former athletes and current athletes. You can take all that data and then through the book from start to finish, we can go through the recruiting process together. Chapter 1 literally is busting myths and learning the data. Chapter 2 is, let's say you've never thought about this before. Here's what to think about. And that takes you all the way to the final chapter, which is we're making a decision after we've finished visiting campuses. So I want to do this with you. We're doing this together. I'm not a concierge service. I'm not asking for $4,000 to do every part of the process for you. I don't even think that's good for you. I want you to get this information and learn how to tackle it yourself because that will yield the best result for you.
Knowledge is power, isn't it?
And this thing came together fast. And I'm so proud of it. And I've been getting great feedback so far just with the advanced copies I've distributed. I think this has an opportunity to be something really effective and powerful. And I'm pumped about sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jared, my next question is a selfish one because I have an identical twin brother who is a assistant professor of sports psychology at Missouri State University, and his
Okay.
his specialty is talking about the coach-athlete relationship, my friend, and how that dynamic works in today's athletic field. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you view today's coach-athlete relationship, and how do you think we build trust with today's athlete as well?
I love this question. And I'm actually, to start my answer, I'm going to share an interesting thing that I talk about in the book a little bit. In the recruiting process, one of the things that coaches are actually the most weary of is some of the other coaches in the profession. There is a component of recruiting, Kevin, that is sales. And something that's very hard, if you're a high school student or a parent and this is your first rodeo, it's very hard to differentiate the good coach that values relationships and is going to be super dependable for 4 years from the coach that isn't, but knows exactly what to say to make that sale. So I think there is room for improvement on the coaching side at making sure that your why for wanting to coach the sport at the collegiate level cannot just be your passion about the sport itself. That is what the professional level is for. If you want to coach at the collegiate level, your why has to be developing young leaders, and your favorite vehicle to teach that leadership is the basketball court or the football field or the softball field, whatever it is. So to me, you accomplish that in a couple of critical ways. Way number one, you don't make a promise you can keep. You don't promise infinite playing time to a kid on the recruiting trail. You let them know in advance that this is going to be challenging. This is going to be a serious adventure, but that you are prepared to be their adventure guide. And there's a Latin phrase that a lot of higher ed institutions swear by, which is "in loco parentis," which is in place of parents. So if you are signing yourself up to really get coached, what you're basically signing yourself up for, if it's done right, is I have someone that's going to challenge me and hold me accountable as if they were a surrogate parent, and this is an extended family now. This new team is my extended family. Coaches that do that and offer that balance of challenge and support, I think they have the sauce. And one of the really cool things is I'm seeing some mid-major teams at the D1 level and also some D2 and some D3 teams experience tremendous success. And it's not just because the coaches have great IQs for the basketball game. It's because they're great relationship builders and they're great mentors.
Yeah, and Jared, you brought up earlier the involvement of parents in the recruiting process, and obviously, if you're involved and an engaged parent, you want the best for your kids. So I'm curious, what are the top three things parents parents and athletes need to ask themselves before going into the recruiting process?
That is a great, great question. And I'm going to be honest with you when I say I do not know if every parent is ready to handle the response, but I'm going to give it to you anyway.
Fair enough.
Which is, if I am a college coach and I am talking either on a Zoom or on a campus visit, and I am directing questions to your child, and you are answering them, and then I try to redirect the questions to your child, and your child is not really talking, but you're giving the substantive responses for them. Based on the research I've done and based on my own personal experience, there is an extremely high probability that that child is moving down that coach's recruiting list in real time. Reason being, when we coach someone at the collegiate level, our relationship is built on open and honest communication. Because of that, I'm evaluating the communication skills, not of the family, but of the recruit in the recruiting process. So the book features a ton of strategies to help teach your child how to develop those communication skills. And it also, every chapter of the book ends with a section specifically for parents and what they can do to enable their child to act and take a step back in that process. There is a talking point, and a very specific one, at the level of the Women's Basketball Coaches Association. So like college basketball coaches meet up every year, Final Four weekend. This year it's in Cleveland. And they talk about best practices. And one of the best practices right now, Kevin, is saying to parents, I will always have a conversation with you, the parent, about your child's mental health, about any danger that you feel that they're in, about their well-being, about their academics, and just about how they're doing. I cannot talk about basketball with you as a parent. And I think just because of how AAU and club works, and these parents are paying money, real money, hard-earned money, and a lot of it to see their kids go through this process, I think because of that, they kind of want the college game to be more transactional than it actually is. So my advice to any parent listening would be, please take a step back and let the college process play out the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jared, just because this is something that really annoys me about how college athletics has changed. I'm all for name, image, and likeness and paying athletes what they're worth. But the purist in me, Jared, says to myself that the essence of college athletics, at least a small piece of it anyway, has now been eroded in favor of how much money can a school pay me, or what can a school offer me, or what are my options, rather than selecting a school for my parents went there as alumni, so I want to following the tradition, or I want to go to a specific school or play college basketball for what it will fulfill me with as a person, as opposed to what materialistic things it can offer me. So, how do you think we can balance name, image, and likeness while also protecting the purity of what college athletics and what college basketball is intended for?
A not only a good question, but a very important question for the future of our game. What I think is going to happen is I actually think we're starting to see two tiers. Tier one, your Power Five schools and the kids that they are recruiting who are like your bona fide ESPN top 150 college basketball or high school prospects in the nation, right? So what I think is going to eventually happen is we might see another conference realignment in the NCAA, but the alignment, rather than being just about league prestige, is actually going to be about what conferences have NIL resources and what conferences don't. And I also think that that's kind of needed to address an important gray area, and I'm seeing this happen in real time. High school athletes think that NIL is just going to be a regular part of every recruiting conversation right now. Outside of the Power Five, a lot of schools don't have the resources to do that and to give you that opportunity. There were arguments during COVID time, since we talked about COVID earlier, Kevin, there were arguments during COVID time about getting rid of some Division I scholarships just because the scholarships were hard for the schools to afford. Right now, I need more high school athletes to realize that unless they're like in the top 5% of the recruiting pool, NIL is probably not in the conversation. They need to search for a school based on the exact things you just said. Go to the best academic school you can. Find the right coaching staff. Find the right prestige. Find the right fit. Go to a place where you can build a legacy, to your point. And I think as things kind of shift, that map will become a little bit more cut and dry because this is all happening so quickly. I think right now, Kevin, we're living in the gray area.
Absolutely. And Jared, how, for you personally, how do you think you've changed the most or evolved the most since stepping away from coaching as a person individually?
Oh my goodness. I talk to my wife about this all the time. The number one reason, Kevin, why I want, like, I'm knocking on wood to get cleared. I don't know what it's going to be, but if I ever get cleared and I have the opportunity to coach again, the why is because I am 50 times, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say this, 50 times more patient when reacting to things now. I have the ability to take in things and my blood pressure doesn't go up and my heart rate doesn't go up because, hey, after a year and a half of doctors saying to you, we need you monitoring your heart rate 24/7 and it can't go up. It turns out you get better at very specific skills. I have a lot more patience than I used to. I have a lot more grace for mistakes than I used to. And I think I would be a better coach for players because of what this has taught me about that. And I hope I get the opportunity to show it in the future.
Yeah, and I promise I only have 3 more questions left, and I'll get you out of here, my friend. And
I've been having a ball. You can ask whatever you want. This is great.
Absolutely. Oh, well, don't tell me that because I'll keep you here for another 3 hours. But no, I'm curious to ask you also, Jared. We've talked a lot about the current system and how it can better serve athletes. But if you had a magic wand and I told you that you could change only one thing about the way we recruit and retain college athletes today and college basketball players, I'm curious, how would you change the system to make it more seamless and equitable as well?
Oh my, I want to be the president of the NCAA so bad. So this is a great question.
Be careful what you wish for, okay?
So a little look into the past for me. Before I got into coaching, I went to college to be a sports broadcaster, and I used to host a podcast called The Armchair Athletic Directors, and this is all we talked about. Here is what I would do. I would make one change. It would be a sweeping change, and it would actually address NIL for all sports. I would allow boosters and alums to compensate players however they see fit. I would have enforcement at the NCAA level in place to make sure that no money is ever coming directly from the school. And I would basically say, from now on, we're gonna do scholarship athletics the old school way. We're honoring you with a scholarship that also covers the cost of attendance, and any additional money we're going to allow you to get on your name, image, and likeness in the community. We will even help you make those connections. I think the moment that everything is above water and you just put it out there and allow it to be like that, two things will happen. Thing one, the oil will separate from the water, and your Oklahoma States with T. Boone Pickens and your Alabamas are going to be in their own universe doing their thing. And by the way, that's okay. Let them do their thing. But you can then also reorganize the other schools that maybe don't have the means to do everything that Alabama can, but can still do the great things that make college sports, specifically developing young people and putting on a competitive product. And I would just make everything above water, give more resources to legislate it. And I truly believe if we did that, the problem would resolve itself in 5 years.
Yeah, well, it's quickly becoming sort of a misguided. I'm not going to call it broken, but I'll call it a misguided system, because what I'm worried about, Jared, is what you said, the smaller schools and their place in the college sort of athletic ecosystem. So what I'm worried about is, the majesty of what makes the final or the NCAA tournament what it is when you have, say, a 16 upsetting a 1 or a 15 upsetting a 2. So with that as a backdrop, I'm curious to ask you about, if you had a chance to talk to the Power 5 commissioners about the future of college basketball specifically, because a lot of them are worried about the future of college football, but I'm wondering about the future of college basketball and how it will evolve to fit today's college landscape. So what would be your message to those commissioners?
So I was actually just talking to somebody about this yesterday. History lesson for some of your listeners that are maybe learning about some of this stuff for the first time. Before the NCAA tournament was the big deal that it was, the big game in town was something called the National Invitational Tournament, the NIT. It took place in Madison Square Garden every year. It still does. The difference now is that the NIT participants are actually the teams that don't get selected for the NCAA tournament. And the reason that happened was that literally, I want to say it's longer than it was now because I pretend I'm not as old as I was, but it might be like 60 or 70 years ago now. There was concerns about corruption with the NIT, and the NCAA, this new game in town, swooped in and did it better. And I think there's this cycle where right now we're hitting the cycle of we don't know if we can do it better anymore. What I would be telling Power 5 athletic directors and presidents is, I'm not sure how much longer this lasts where the NCAA is the tournament organizer. I think somebody else swoops in and makes it. And you have to decide, if you're in a Power 5 situation, do you just want to do something on your own and let the NCAA tournament stay the NCAA tournament? Or do you want to collaborate and be a part of the solution, but you're going to have to revenue share? And I mean, it's crazy. But when people talk about the greed of the NCAA and the money that's being changed around, they're really only actually talking about like 80 schools. Everybody else is operating in a completely different universe. I would love to to see Power Five schools just decide one way or the other to either reconnect with that universe and make it right, or just go do their own thing so that the universe can recreate itself.
Yeah, and I'm also fascinated to ask you about college coaches and burnout because oftentimes you get kids that with athletics or basketball is their outlet from the environment they came, and coaches often have to be um, psychologists on
Yes.
on everything outside of basketball in addition to basketball. So I'm curious to get your particular opinion based on both your health scare with COVID and your experience as a coach about how you think today's college coach in basketball specifically can avoid burnout.
I'm going to answer this in two parts because this is something that I'm actually really worried about. I think that the modern college basketball coach is perpetually exhausted. Even at the Division III level, I have watched in the last couple weeks some incredible head coaches step away from the profession. Head coaches with perennial top of the conference NCAA tournament caliber coaches step away. One of whom is I would consider a great friend and a mentor. And there are some coaches who I think are struggling with their institutions because they go and they listen to the HR departments in their colleges talk about work-life balance, but then they coach a team, and at the D3 or D2 level, many of them can't even hire a full-time assistant in their budget. So what are they supposed to do? Like they're being told they're supposed to care about work-life balance, but then they have to do the job oftentimes, like at the D1 level, there are 5 people full-time to do the job. That job doesn't change at the D3 level, but now there's 1.5 people to do the job. What I would advise coaches to do, and it actually kind of goes back to some of what we were talking about before, Kevin. Find things that make you outside of the sport. Could be family, like it is for my wife and I. Could be performing arts, music, theater, something that you just love and want to also pour yourself into. And make sure that you are consistently pouring yourself into that other cup as well, so that when you are burned out and exhausted, you aren't just going home and turning work back on. You've learned how to say no every once in a while. The kids will move on if you say no to them doing a workout once. They'll get over it. You have to fill your cup too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jared, I know you take a holistic approach to both education and coaching, and I'm wondering why do you think there's a value in viewing things from a holistic perspective?
Great answer. Oh, great question. Excuse me. I hope to give you a great answer. We'll see. That's up to you. I think when it comes to holistic approach, what I'm really trying to get people to understand is the intrinsic value of everything that they do. It will always be easier, always, to hire a service. It will always be easier to outsource something. But what I'm really starting to learn is nothing that's worth having in this life comes easy. Mm-hmm. And what tends to happen is you look back, and now that I'm I'm literally 20 years removed from being a first year in college, I can look back on that experience now, and I can think to myself, the things that I actually look back on the most fondly were the experiences that I owned, that my friends and we did these things together. We built these things. We built these long-lasting products and relationships and memories. It wasn't the things we ordered. It wasn't the things we outsourced. It wasn't the things we had someone else do for us to help us get ahead. It was the things that we did that made us us, that I look back on so fondly. To bring this maybe full circle, and this is probably a good way to honestly end it, Kevin. Mm-hmm. keep that exact analogy in mind, and this is where I would challenge a high school athlete and their family. Do not make the most important part of this process the day that you commit to a college. The most important thing that you should be thinking about right now is your senior day in college. When you walk off the court and the emotions just get the best of you because that's the last time you're showing up in front of your home crowd and your home team and your coaches in that environment, and how worth it was. And look for the team and the coaching staff that you know is going to make every day matter up until that point, rather than just kind of, I don't want to say selling out, but selling up to just try to say that you committed to the best team you could. Yeah. That's when this process goes wrong, is when you lean away from that holistic component.
Yeah, and my final question for you, Jared, is how I end all of my podcasts, my friend. I'm curious to ask you about legacy and how you view your own personal and professional legacy, my friend.
Oh, great question. It's funny. Our bond here is as journalists. I can't help myself when it comes to energy and passion. People are always going to remember me as a passionate and energetic person because I'm a walking golden retriever, and that just is what it is. But when it comes down to the other components of my legacy, I want to be remembered as someone that really helped bridge an information gap and made things more accessible and made things more approachable and made things less intimidating. And I really think, it's not up for me to say whether or not I do it, but I'd love to look back at this chapter 5 years from now and be like, wow, we did do it. That's really cool. We're just experiencing it in real time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Jared, tell me if people want to get connected with you or buy the book, my friend. What's the best way they can do that?
Great question. Really easy. I am at Jared the Coach on almost every social media thing. So Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can find me at Jared the Coach, all one word. And then I made sure that the book and the website had the same title. So Nail the Recruiting Process is the book. NailTheRecruitingProcess.com is the website. And while I obviously am very excited about the book, and the book is a super affordable way to get things done, I'm really making an effort to meet people where they are. There are avenues to work with me for free. There are avenues to bring me on and help me and help you onboard your whole recruiting process and everything in between. So take a look at the website and hopefully you find something you like. And Kevin, thank you again so much for having me. I just had a blast, man. This was awesome.
Well, I have to tell you, as an old sports reporter, I could talk sports all day, my friend. You're really making a difference in the space of athletics and personal development for college athletes and their parents. I want to thank you for helping to move the needle of progress forward in that regard and for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
My pleasure, and you better stay in touch or else I'm going to hold you accountable. That's the coach in me.